Josh, we're going to take, who is from Florida. He's a theist and he wants to discuss why apologetic arguments are persuasive.
Yeah.
Hey, how are you guys?
Good. How are you?
Good. Is my audio okay? Sometimes my audio has problems.
It's fine. Just I'd just politely ask you to kind of dispense with the preamble and get on with the call because we're way over and we do have more calls to get to.
Okay. So the overview of the episode, I think, was something like, are apologetic arguments convincing? And that was the question that I saw in the chat. So, first of all, I have to assume that the showrunners didn't mean can they convince anyone, because obviously people are convinced by apologetics. It's whether or not they ought to be convincing, right?
Yeah, I think that's a fair interpretation. Yeah.
So, what do you guys think? Have you guys ever come across the notion that like a person can have a separate, coherent structure of belief that is strictly devotional in their life, like one that they just use in a devotional, maybe church context, but that it coheres within its own structure, like it's
but it doesn't. But it also, but you're saying it doesn't. It doesn't come into play in any other aspect of their life.
No, I think, people are going to be motivated, especially when it comes to beliefs, right? Like that they have about like how they ought to act and stuff like that. Moral beliefs. It's going to affect those things. But
so like, are you asking more if it's possible to have a belief system that is internally consistent?
Yeah. So if someone has an apologetic where certain things are taken to be axiomatic, like some people start with the assumption that things mean things and that's inherent in reality. That could lead you. There are apologetics that if you take that to be axiomatic, you could get to ideas about God being real based on that.
Yeah, I think there are definitely religious constructions that are internally consistent. I think the issue is that more often than not, right, it comes down to kind of one or two things that I seem to find a lot of times is that even if the religious system is internally consistent, it has axioms at the front that seemingly don't have any other connection to anything, right? Like there's all of these other axioms that, every other system seems to accept, including the non-religious ones. But then there's just these extra axioms out there that supposedly explain more of the world around us. And unfortunately, it just doesn't. And so then we just play the simple game of you have 5 axioms and I have 4, and we have the exact same explanatory power. Or the other side of it is the baggage later on down the road, where it's an internally consistent, system, right, of religious belief. But we've just got literal demonstrations on a regular basis that contradict it. So that's what I tend to find as being the problem. But yeah, I mean, is it possible to have a religious system that is internally consistent? I would say, yeah, it seems like that's true for me. Could I point one out, honestly, off the top of my head? No, I couldn't. But I feel like, yeah, the likelihood of there being one is up there. So
I think the common problem with apologetics, this is my best guess from talking to apologists, is that it attempts to step on other domains, right? Other than, this is my assessment. So like, it's sort of like flat earth, right? If you, the reason flat earth can't be logically consistent is because it's making a scientific claim, and the science shows that the earth isn't flat, right? So like, if you're making a scientific claim and the science says otherwise, you're kind of in a pickle. But I don't think that the kinds of like arguments that you get, Plantinga and did I say his name, Plantinga? I don't know, that guy,
I know who we know.
Yeah. And Dr. Craig, I don't think that those are those kinds of apologetics are actually convincing to the majority of religious people. I doubt that they've even heard them because they're scientific in their nature. I think the number one apologetics people here are things like prime mover arguments, very basic versions of prime mover arguments, and those would be compelling. And they're compelling to me in a devotional context. I think they would be compelling to most people.
Okay, so we kind of, I don't necessarily disagree that an apologetic argument can be persuasive to someone. the thing that kind of I'm interested in is whether they can demonstrate that God exists rather than just simply because, I accept that people believe things. That's not a problem for me, and I don't think it's a problem for, as far as I'm aware, many of the people in this community who are not believers do not have any problem with whatsoever with the fact that people can be convinced to believe something. The important thing is whether that thing is true. Now, in relation to apologetic arguments, what specifically about it, what is there that is out there that you find a good argument which convinces you that God actually exists? Rather than just convinces you to believe, but actually convinces you that God exists in and of himself. Because we can be convinced, we can have good reasons for being convinced about things which aren't true. For example, you could have a terrible car wreck and be brought back from the brink of death and be told that many people were praying for you, and that could convince you. That's a good reason. It's not a good reason to believe that God exists, but it is a good reason that informs belief as absent of other things. So if you're not sure aware of the kind of the medical intervention and whatnot, and that's the only information you've got, that can be a good reason to inform that belief. It is not a good reason for the argument that God actually exists. That's a separate thing. So what is it? What apologetic arguments are there that convince you that God actually exists?
Well, this is why I brought up the difference, I think, between what you might call, what's the word? What you might call I can't think of the word. Beliefs in the structure of empirical beliefs, right? Things that you're going to have direct empirical experience or direct empirical evidence to believe, and things you might believe devotionally. I think there are very strong apologetic arguments in the devotional sphere, right? Like have you ever heard the old joke, right? Look at the trees. They say, oh, if you look at the trees, you'll see God. I don't think that's a bad argument at all. I think if you suspect or have an intuition that there is meaning in reality and that the organization of things is more than random, that would be a very good reason to believe that there's a God.
Why? I mean, there's a if we come across a garden that looks well manicured and looks like there is a gardener there, and yet we sit and we wait, and no matter how long we wait, that gardener doesn't appear. Is the garden itself a good reason to believe that there is a gardener? Even if we do not see one, we see no evidence whatsoever of a gardener, is simply the presence of a garden which appears well manicured evidence of that gardener?
Well, I think that's exactly my point. It's going to depend on how you're looking at the garden. If you want to ask a question about what we can confirm to exist, using empirical data, and you care about that, and that's your mode of understanding, you're not going to be able to say that there's a gardener. But if what you care about is finding good explanations for your intuitions about the nature of gardens, it could be a good explanation.
But it's not evidence. I didn't ask about a good explanation for your intuitions. I asked about evidence. And it doesn't have to. And now this can include proof. This, in fact, is a philosophical argument. It's not one that relies on empiricism. It is a philosophical argument. So, and where is the proof in that God, if the gardener never turns up, where is the proof so we can throw all empiricism aside, where is the proof that God created that there is a gardener when their gardener never turns up?
There's a sort of assumption, I think, that doesn't match in this analogy, that doesn't match reality. I mean, it's the religious people I know and myself make the claim that we have had experiences of the gardener in this analogy, right?
Right, but your experience of the gardener is inconsistent with the other experiences with the gardener that people discuss. And if that's the case, then we have to have a set of criteria to determine which one of you is more accurate at the very least. Not saying that one of you is flat wrong or that one of you is 100% right, but just which one of you is more accurate. And if everybody is constantly giving inconsistent, explanations and descriptions, then it just seems, again, like I've said a couple of times this episode, it's just on shaky ground. It feels problematic because you come up to me and say, well, yeah, of course I saw the gardener. He's your typical, country bumpkin looking dude, somebody that probably lives, down in the South near SR, he's got the overalls and he's got the straw in his mouth. And the next person goes, oh, no, you're completely confused. Well, a really, really, well-dressed female. She's, got this beautiful white dress on, and, she's very, very soft spoken, very loving. So that's the problem. And like the information that is the same across all of these descriptions is insanely mundane. Like if we're already accepting we're talking about a gardener, then we're talking about a person. And so it's like, oh, cool, you guys all said it was a person, but the people you've individually described are vastly contradictory. So it still
And
just
on
seems.
that note, Josh,
Yeah.
I appreciate your call, but we are going to have to let you go.
Yeah,
Please,
call back,
please
Josh.
do call back, because this has been a great conversation and I'd love to
Seriously.
continue it.